Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another exciting module here in Bio 215, also known as plant taxonomy, where we want to be able to take a look at the world around us, make observations, and ask fundamental questions dealing with the organization of the botanical world. So, before I begin, I'd like to share something with you. I'd like for everybody to meet our new lab assistant. There she is. Everyone, I'd like for you to meet Duchess, and she has entered my life. And if you see her on webcam during open office hours, feel free to say hi. She's very friendly and wants to interact with everybody. So let's get into our topic of the week. So this week, we are covering a brand new topic as part of our module. And this module will be focused on plant tissues. Now, I know when many people think about plants, they see leaves, flowers, roots, and stems. But we're going to save that for next week. What they don't usually think of is really what's happening inside those structures and how millions of cells are arranged and organized and even multiply to keep a plant alive through different processes. The reality is that a plant is a complex organism, just as us. They don't have organs like hearts, though, lungs, or even kidneys. That would be a little weird. But they do have specialized tissues that perform many of the essential functions necessary for their survival. They need systems for protection, transportation, support, growth, and ultimately energy production. And that's exactly what we're going to want to accomplish in this module for the week. Because I feel like that will be a great way to start scaffolding and building upon the complexities of our botanical world. But first, I want to introduce you to some of the major tissue systems or types that we will experience in our work for the week. There's dermal tissue, vascular tissue, and ground tissue. If you can understand what each of these systems does on a broad level, it helps you build those connections. And you'll have a good foundational understanding of almost anything there is to discuss in plant anatomy. A leaf is a good example, as it contains a variety of these different types of tissues. And we'll get exploring with those this week. And let's start with one of the first groups, the dermal tissue. Think of the dermal tissue as the plant's first line of defense. If you ever touched a leaf, a stem, or even the skin of, let's say, an apple, you've actually interacted with the dermal tissue. In many ways, dermal tissue functions much like our skin. Your skin protects you from injury and prevents excessive water loss and serves as a barrier for pathogens to prevent you from getting sick. Plant dermal tissue actually performs the same roles. The outermost layer is called the epidermis, just like ours. Covering the epidermis is a waxy layer known as the cuticle. This cuticle helps reduce water loss, which is especially important for plants living in drier or environments. For an example, think of a cactus growing in the desert. The water is very hard to come by and extremely limited. The thick cuticle covering the cactus prevents precious water from evaporating into the atmosphere. And also, you can find specialized structures within this type of tissue called the stomata. And the stomata are tiny pores that allow gases to move in and out of plants. You see, plants need carbon dioxide to carry out a process called photosynthesis, which helps them make simple sugars and allow them to produce their own energy. But in these plants, the stomata actually acts as an adjustable window that can open and close depending on environmental conditions. On a hot summer day, the plant loses too much water, and these stomata can close and conserve that moisture. So while dermal tissue may seem very simple, it plays a critical role in protection, water conservation, and gas exchange. Topics we'll cover later in the course. Let's talk about the other tissue type, and that would be vascular tissues. This is one of my favorite systems of tissues found in plants, and it's essentially a plant's transportation network. If you've ever driven around on an interstate highway system, you've already understood the basic idea of this type of tissue. Highways connect different locations and allow resources to move efficiently from one place to the next. But plants, their vascular tissue system serves a very similar purpose. The vascular tissue contains two specialized transportation tissues within it, xylem and phloem. Xylem moves water and dissolved minerals from the roots upwards through the plant. Think about it as almost like not just a highway, but almost a pulley system. And the water absorbed in the roots must travel all the way to the top branches. This is an incredible engineering challenge, and the xylem makes that possible. And when we take a look at the botanical world, the giant redwood trees found in California that can grow over 300 feet tall, and the xylem is proportional to the size of the tree. But there's also the phloem, and that does a little bit of a different job. During photosynthesis, again, the process in which plants need to be able to produce energy, leaves produce the sugars that serve as the food for the plant, but the sugars need to be distributed throughout the organism. Phloem acts as a delivery service, transporting these energy-rich compounds wherever they are needed. For example, if a plant is growing new roots underground, those roots have to depend on sugars produced in the leaves above the ground. Phloem makes that connection possible in these distant parts of the plant and keeps the resources flowing. Think ultimately that the xylem as a water supply pipeline and the phloem is food delivery. Now, without vascular tissues, we have to see what actually is happening because plants need it. And plants would remain very small because transporting resources over long distances is nearly impossible. In fact, the evolution of vascular tissues helped plants colonize the land and eventually grow into the forests that we see today. And this all occurred possibly 570 million years ago during the Devonian time period, with some potential occurrences that I'm currently studying here in West Virginia, which may suggest that this tissue and invasion of land may have shown up in older geologic units of time. I think that's really fascinating that this tissue has the same functionality through these broad time and space intervals. And now let's move on to ground tissue. Ground tissue often receives less attention than vascular tissue, but it actually makes up the plant body and performs an incredible variety of different functions. If dermal tissue is protective layer and vascular is the transportation layer, then ground tissue is where much of the plant's daily work happens, as ground tissue can perform photosynthesis, store nutrients, water, and provide ultimately structural support. The most common type of ground tissue is actually called the parenchyma cell, and these cells are often considered to be the workhorses of the plant. Another type of tissue that I'd like to share with you is that of the collenchyma tissue. Collenchyma tissues, they provide flexible support, and I like to think of them as the flexible support beam of the plant. A great example of this that you probably have already experienced is the stringy material that makes up a stalk of celery. When you take that piece of celery and you pull it apart into those stringy fibers, you're taking them and you're finding that there's lots of individual ones. These individual fibers help support the plant while allowing it to bend without breaking. But then we also have sclerenchyma tissues. And sclerenchyma cells provide rigid support and protection. They actually have the thicker cell walls when we look at them in using a microscope, and they can be extremely strong. Have you, let's say, bitten into a pear? I know I haven't because pears are one of the foods I will not eat. But when we when you bite into a pear, you'll notice that gritty texture, which is one of the reasons why I don't like pears. Those are often sclerids, a type of sclerenchyma cell, and the hard shell of a walnut is another good example of this tissue in action. The gritty texture provides protection, and same thing with the shell of the walnut. It's all about strength and durability in this case. Now, what's really fascinating, though, is that these tissues, they never work alone. Take a simple sunflower. The dermal tissue protects the plant from water loss and environmental damage. Vascular transports water from the roots to and produces the sugar, helps produce the sugars and move those around. The ground tissue carries out the photosynthesis, stores nutrients, and provides structural support. Each of these systems depends on the others. Without them, the plant will not function. And if let's say the vascular tissue fails, resources can't move through the plant, dermal tissue can become damaged because there's not enough nutrients coming around, and the plant may lose the excessive water. But these are the observations and commentary that we need to make as biology students studying plants. Is that there is a lot of interplay going on in structures and tissues, which help us establish really what a plant is. Now, in conclusion, these systems allow plants to grow, reproduce, and respond to their environment. As we move through this module, I want you to keep that in mind because you'll learn on how to identify these tissues using microscope slides and connect cell structure to function and explain why certain tissues are found in very specific locations within roots, stems, leaves, fruits. These tissues are everywhere within a plant. And you'll discover that plant anatomy follows a simple and powerful principle throughout biology. Structure determines function. And so we're going to be covering that in the coming and next week. And by understanding on how these tissues are organized, I think you'll gain a deeper appreciation and understanding for how plants survive in their environments, ranging from deserts to grasslands to tropical forests and even alpine ecosystems. So let's get ready to examine some plant tissue structures and types. And as always, if you have any questions about the material this week, I am happy to assist you during my open office hours. You can send me an email, stop by my office, or set up a video chat with me, and we can go over the material one-on-one or as a group. Until next time, I will see you in the next weekly welcome, and let's get through our material this week.